Something huge in America started this last week on Thursday night. Anybody know what started Thursday night? Football. That's right. NFL, baby. Now, I should actually, I guess, give credit to college football started last Saturday night. And I guess I'm down here in the South. You never realize how big college football is when you live in Ohio and Cincinnati. You know, they had a team. They were good a couple years ago. Then you move south, and college football, little bit of a bigger thing down here with the SEC. And are most people here Clemson fans? Is that our closest school? Yeah. Well, I never got the chance to play football personally. I was more of a baseball guy myself. I have been told by a couple coaches who saw me in class that I probably should have and could have played nose tackle. But lo and behold, with the Sabbath being Friday night, I was never able to actually participate. So I've had to find other ways to participate in football. And one of the ways that I found is fantasy football. Does anyone here play fantasy football? All right, couple. All my family I know plays. Every year for the past 2 or 3 years, my family started a fantasy football league. For those of you who don't know what a fantasy football league is, maybe a week, 2 weeks before the football season starts, for us it's about 10, 12 people in my family and some friends all get together and you essentially draft your team, right? So, for instance, my dad has a team, Dan's team. Alex, my wife, the champion last year, whatever, she won last year, so congrats. But she has a team, my brother, my cousins, we all have teams. And we get together and you draft players for your team. Now, they don't all have to be on the same team, right? So if I wanted a quarterback from the Eagles, let's say, and I wanted a running back from the Cowboys, I can have both of those guys on my team. And the fundamental idea is when the player gets the ball, and let's say if it's a quarterback, completes a pass, running back runs for some yards, maybe it's a touchdown, they score points. So there kind of starts to become some strategy when you're drafting in fantasy football. You probably want to draft somebody who gets the ball a lot, right? You wouldn't draft an offensive lineman. They don't really score and get the ball while they're still important. You probably want a running back or a wide receiver or whatnot. And you want to draft the players who are physically the fastest, the strongest, the tallest, and probably the best at their positions. But if you'll follow the analogy for me, how would God draft players for his fantasy football team? If you would, please turn to 1 Corinthians 1, verse 27. Again, that's 1 Corinthians 1, 27. It says, "But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise, and God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things which are mighty. And the base things of the world and the things which are despised God has chosen, and the things which are not to bring to nothing the things that are." Now, if someone described my fantasy football team as not many mighty, not many noble, and foolish, I'd probably get a little upset because I think my team's pretty good this year. So we know that God hasn't picked the best people from their mightiness or their physical or the strongest and fastest people out there. But how does God pick who he drafts? If you'll turn to 1 Samuel 16 for me. And this is a scripture, it comes up a lot. I think I actually used it in 2 of my last 4 messages, so it's starting to become one of my favorite examples in the Bible. But again, that's 1 Samuel 16, and we're going to go to verse 7. Again, that's 1 Samuel 16, verse 7. So Samuel is now essentially picking a new king for Israel and goes to the sons of Jesse. He's picking a new king, and God is guiding who's going to be picked. And lo and behold, we all know the story, right? They line up all the strong, tall brothers and doesn't get picked. We're talking about kind of just the logic of who God picks. He says, "But the Lord said to Samuel, 'Do not look at his appearance or his physical stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as man sees. For the man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart.'" So we see from that when the Lord would be, once again, follow the analogy, drafting his fantasy football team, he looks at the heart, not necessarily the physical attributes. Another thing you need to think about when you're drafting your fantasy football team is what positions you need to draft. Now, if I'm building a football team, am I going to draft 10 quarterbacks? Probably not. You'll end up like the Cleveland Browns. So you don't want to just draft 10 quarterbacks. You don't just want to draft all wide receivers. You don't want to draft all running backs, right? You need all of those positions to have a good football team. You relatively usually need like a quarterback, wide receiver, running back, tight end. You also need someone to play defense and special teams. You usually have to draft a kicker to score points. You know, everyone's favorite team has lost a game on a kick, and that's just the worst thing in the world. They got one job, make the kick, but I digress. If you would, please turn to 1 Corinthians 12. So to make a full football team, we need people at every different position. And in 1 Corinthians 12, we get an explanation of the analogy of the body being us, the congregation, or, if you will, the fantasy football team, and what the different parts of the body need to do. We're going to pick it up in verse 20. But now there are indeed many members, yet one whole body. And the eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again the head to the feet say, I have no need of you. No, much rather, those members of the body which seem to be weaker are necessary, and those members of the body which we think to be less honorable, on those we bestow greater honor, and our unpresentable parts have greater modesty. Once again, if we had 8 quarterbacks on our team, it wouldn't be much good. Now, I'm not going to make the full direct relation here and say, oh, well, deacons are clearly running backs and everything. That would be a little much for me to try to get up here and anoint that. But there are obviously the biblically defined roles in the Bible: pastor, elder, deacon, deaconess. And we can see how that might correlate to the different positions you and I have been drafted by God to play. But what about those undefined roles that show up in the Bible? Not everyone is called to be an elder or a deacon or a deaconess necessarily. Now, when Paul was writing this analogy, they probably didn't have a sound system to set up, but sound system is an important role. As far as my research tells me, they didn't have make sure I get this, annual Summers Inn Taco Fiesta every week. They didn't have that Mexican food in ancient Israel, as far as I can tell. They might have had a end-of-the-year harvest fig festival. I don't know if they would have had the whole bar like we have back there. But somebody has to play the role of setting that up, organizing that. Somebody has to set up the hall if it needs to be set up. Someone has to take it down. And maybe God chose you and called you so you could help with that. Now, if you've been in church for a while, you've probably heard an analogy along these lines of, even if you're not the one behind the mic or the one behind the camera or whatnot, you still have an important role to play in your service. And you'll often see examples like I just brought up, setting out the sound books, setting out the chairs, things like that. However, when I was writing this message, I was kind of just thinking of all the different roles I had heard brought up. And there was one role I don't think gets brought up enough, and that's an audience member. In football, I think this would best coordinate to the fans. Now, you don't all have to start cheering for me as my fans now. But fans do play a pretty important role, especially down here in like the SEC, right? You fans here are crazy. But in the NFL, obviously the Seattle Seahawks, Aaron's favorite team. I thought about not including this because I didn't want to, shout out the Seahawks, but you're welcome. The Seahawks' big thing was the 12th man, right? You only have 11 guys on the field at a time. But the Seahawks fans are so loud and so excited, it's like having a 12th man on your team. If you're a member of the audience, maybe you can't, or maybe you're just not this week behind the mic. Maybe you've never touched a computer in your life and you don't want to help run the sound. Maybe you didn't bring anything for the summer taco fiesta party. Maybe you didn't help set up because in a situation like here in Columbia, we don't really have a ton of set up, the chairs and everything, right? We're the only ones in this building. We can avoid having a lot of the tear down and set up. However, I want you to know that you're still a valued member of the congregation if you're listening, talking, understanding, and fellowshipping. Now, you can't just come in, sit down, sit here for an hour, warm a seat, and get out, right? We know not to be lukewarm like that. But if there was no one else in the audience other than people who were actively doing something, there wouldn't be a whole lot of excitement, or I'd be looking out to a very empty crowd. I can tell you 100%, my experience, for instance, running the sound, inevitably something will go wrong when you're running the sound, and you will be out in the back trying to fix something. For instance, last week I was running the sound, and Mr. Martin Braun's split sermon, he used the acronym TRUE, and I missed R and U points. I had something come up with the sound. I had to step in the back, and I missed the R and the U points. If every single person was serving and volunteering, something would inevitably come up, and people would start to miss the message. Having someone there in the audience just to listen is just as important as someone to speak. I promise, even if you're not speaking or the soundboard or prepping a meal, you are extremely important, and everyone who gets up here and helps, whether it's with the taco party we're having today, speaking, the sound system, setup, tear down, we really do appreciate it, and God appreciates the fact that you're here as well. In conclusion, brethren, God is drafting his own fantasy football team with you and I as a church. We know God doesn't look just at the physical traits, but he looks at the heart. And even if you're not up here behind the podium or have a certain defined role, you have just as an important role as somebody in the audience or a fan. I hope y'all have a good week.